We have some developing news out of Ukraine. 26 people are wounded and one is dead after a council member detonated a grenade in the middle of a local government meeting. The entire incident was caught on live stream. The Ukrainska Pravda newspaper identified the man as Serhiy Batrin, a Ukrainian parliamentarian and co-member of President Volodymyr Zelensky's Servant of the People party. The explosion was reported to authorities by a woman who viewed it on live stream, Ukrainian Pravda reported.
As for where President Biden stands, he made it pretty clear on Twitter, posting just moments ago, Ukraine's freedom is on the line, and if we do not stop Putin, it will endanger the freedom of everyone almost everywhere. Joining us now to discuss is humanitarian activist Charles McBryde. Now, the man who detonated the grenade is someone who is a veteran and was a lawmaker. What do we make of this incident? What insight, if any, does it give us into the state of Ukraine domestically right now?
Thanks so much for having me, Jessica. I think this reveals two things about the current situation in Ukraine. The first is that this is a deeply traumatized population. They have been traumatized not just by 2 years of war, but by almost 10 years of war. If you go back to the Russian annexation of Crimea and the Donbass back in 2014, this is a population that has been gripped in war for the past 10 years, and that has side effects in terms of how the population deals with things. And I think that leads into a second aspect of this, which is the healthcare system in Ukraine and how it has been incredibly challenging for the healthcare system to deal with the results of the war in terms of all of the additional trauma that's occurred as a result of it, particularly in regards to veterans and mental health. Ukraine is a country that is still trying to sort of enter the modern conception of mental health and have a robust understanding of that. There have been significant strides in that sense, but it's still important to acknowledge that there's a lot of veterans of this war who are going to be bearing the scars and the trauma of this conflict. And they're going to be taking that into civilian life, both during the war and after the war. And that's something that Zelensky and his administration, as well as just the national populace of Ukraine, Ukrainian society, is going to have to figure out various ways to reintegrate these people into society, because the last thing that you want are a bunch of disgruntled veterans who feel like they were given a raw deal. And that's something Ukraine is going to have to figure out over the coming years.
Right, and something we unfortunately understand all too well in the United States, with particularly veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq. Charles, do we have a sense so far, I know you've been on the ground in Ukraine, of how many soldiers have been injured and how many killed? Because, of course, we have to consider that families are going to bear the trauma from this as well, having lost loved ones or dealing with the potential disabilities that come from these wartime casualties.
Right. So the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense indicates that something on the order of 200,000 Ukrainian soldiers have lost their lives as a result of this conflict, with hundreds of thousands more wounded, disabled, etc., as a result of the fighting. In addition to civilian populations who are affected both by active shelling and missiles, as well as landmines and unexploded ordnance that they happen upon when they're plowing their fields or walking through their towns. I've been working with veterans dealing with PTSD issues for the past several years, and I can tell you that these things leave a scar long after the actual war ends. And one of the things that's incredibly important in relation to PTSD is people finding purpose in their life, because when they are in the service, they have a greater sense of purpose for what they are doing, and after they try and reintegrate into civilian life, sometimes it's very difficult for them to find that, particularly if the war that they happened to be involved with doesn't seem, upon reflection, to have been a just war. So the benefit of what's happening in Ukraine is this is a war for national survival. So these people are heroes. They are considered heroes by their community, by their society. But once those heroes come home broken and damaged, you have to find a way to reintegrate them. And if you don't do that responsibly, you're going to see more instances like this.
Your recent documentary, Note of Defiance, I watched it. It was quite touching. It really spoke to that resilience of Ukrainians and finding purpose at a time of war. There are many Americans that are not sympathetic to the plight of Ukrainians, very skeptical of the money being sent over to Ukraine. Myself, I'm skeptical when any dollar is transferred into the Pentagon's account. $886 billion is far too much to be giving them. But I understand it to be your view that we should give funding and aid to Ukraine, but not to Israel. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Right. So, I mean, a couple parts of your question there. First of all, the documentary that we filmed in Ukraine, Note of Defiance, is a testament to the resilience of the Ukrainian people. And it's specifically designed to portray Ukrainians as having agency. As it's very popular in Western media to portray Ukrainian civilians as like tear-stained, soot-covered faces coming off of a refugee train. And we wanted to show what we had experienced of Ukraine, which was an incredibly strong and resilient population, and one that deserved highlighting. We needed to show the story of the people who were just trying to live their lives in the face of cultural extinction. And that's what we tried to accomplish with Note of Defiance. The director, Brian Henderson, approached me last year and said, "Hey, I'd like you to take me into Ukraine so that I can shoot this film." And the way that he pitched it made me think, this is the story that we need to tell about Ukraine. So that is currently available right now on Prime Video. And we are waiting to hear back about it's Oscar and BAFTA qualified, and we're waiting to hear back to see if there will be a nomination for that film. Now, going into the question regarding Israel, in my mind, the United States has a commitment to Ukraine, and they have a commitment to Israel. It's had a commitment to Israel for a very long time, and the Ukraine commitment is much more recent. However, I have been involved in the human rights and humanitarian aid field now for the past 6 years, and I think that I have learned the ability to distinguish between the aggressor and the victim. And in the case of Russia and Ukraine, I believe that there is a very clear aggressor. The Russian Federation is a revanchist settler colonial state, which is trying to expand and reconstitute its former empire in the Soviet Union. That is, in many ways, precisely what Israel has been trying to do to Palestine. And it's really confusing to me to see the United States have this public commitment to Ukraine and then turn around and also have a public commitment to Israel and funnel billions and billions of dollars to the Israeli government, to the point where we are sponsoring programs like free healthcare for Israelis, while Americans have no access to anything like that here in the States. And we're doing this against a population that's crowded into an open air prison camp and can launch homemade rockets made out of sewer pipes into Israel. And we are giving Israel state-of-the-art military equipment and funneling billions of dollars to them to do so, and not brokering any criticism of that whatsoever. So in my mind, these are two incredibly distinct issues. You can support Ukraine and also be skeptical of the money going to Ukraine and making sure you're monitoring that. But we should really be identifying the billions and billions of dollars that we have been sending to Israel. If it were my decision, I would funnel that money and the weapons going to Israel, and I would send that to Ukraine. In my mind, that's a much more important battle for the interests of the United States in that region. And where we put our money, where we put our resources should reflect that.
Charles, thank you so much for joining us. That's going to do it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks, and we'll see you next Friday.
Bye.